The opinions expressed in the following program do not necessarily reflect those of our sponsors and are only those of the individual commentators. Viewer discretion is advised.
Good evening and welcome to the Raben Report. I'm your host, Elliot Raben, and with me is my entire expert panel, Christina and Anna. How are you both?
Great. How are you, Elliot? Oh
Agnes? Are we going to call
I was
going to
call you Anna, and then I was like, oh, wait, you're not Anna, you're Elliot. So
he looks like Anna.
He does. You guys look a lot alike. It's
now
easy...
look who's confusing people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there you go. Anna, you are back from your trip. How was that?
Oh, it was amazing. It was nice. You know, since the pandemic started, I have been traveling around Canada, and it's very interesting because everyone thinks I'm crazy for taking a plane during, you know, when there is a virus around. But here I am, safe and sound, and enjoying Canada so far.
Yes, well, we are happy to have you back in the studio. We had a great show the week before, but thankfully you're back. And joining us this week as our guest is Yan Shvartsman. Yan, how are you? Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. I'm good, Elliot. How are you?
I'm good. So can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm an independent singer-songwriter, theater composer, and I also work as a personal trainer.
Amazing. Well, we are so excited to have you in the studio for quite a show today, and it just happened by chance that we were able to connect and have you come on the show. So things work out. But first, before we get to our weekly update, it's time for the Raben Rant. Now, I had a completely different Raben rant prepared about government censorship and Bill C-10, but after the last few days, I realized I needed to talk about something more important and more personal: anti-Semitism and propaganda. I'm sure you've heard a lot about what's going on in Israel, in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. Some of what you might be hearing is true, but a lot of it is false. The issue stems from 4 Palestinian families being evicted from their homes for not paying rent to the landlords. The families refused to pay, stating they own the land. The courts have ruled that those families don't, in fact, own the land, but could have stayed had they paid rent. They refused. That's what this debate is about. Who owns the land? There's a lot of history behind it, but I won't be getting into that. What I will be getting into is fake news and anti-Semitism. Time and time again, Jews are villainized. The idea that Israel is evicting people left and right is unequivocally false. Over the past 24 hours, over 600 rockets have been launched at Israeli civilians by Hamas, a terrorist organization in the Gaza Strip. Where's the international outrage? Surely any country being attacked, let alone by terrorists, has the right to defend itself, doesn't it? I'll answer that for you. Yes. Israel has the right to defend itself. Now, if you don't fully understand the conflict, stay out of it. Stop posting on social media from the comfort of your homes when you have no connection to the situation. I do. I have family there, and many other Jews have family there. They are in constant fear of being killed. Already, a building, a car, and a bus were hit by these rockets. At least 3 civilians, Israeli civilians, have been killed, both Jewish and non-Jewish, and many more injured. On top of that, and this is very important, 3 Palestinian children have been killed, not by Israel, but by misfired Hamas rockets. They're killing their own people and using them as human shields, and yet no one wants to talk about that. If you've condemned Israel for evicting those 4 families but have not condemned Hamas as a terrorist organization, you don't care about peace. You don't care about Palestinians. You are complicit in the annihilation of Jews. Your activism is once again lactivism. You're lacking the truth. Because all you're doing is contributing to anti-Semitism and hatred of Jews. Just today, before the show, I saw that Jews in Israel, in a city in Israel, are taking mezuzahs off of their homes. Synagogues are being ransacked. People aren't safe being Jewish in Israel. That's a problem, isn't it? Israel and Israelis are not going anywhere. Palestinians aren't going anywhere either. Anyone who tries to convince you that one must come at the expense of the other is wrong. At the end of the day, this is about 4 families at the center of a legal land dispute, sending rockets, posting about how Hitler was right and how Israel is made up of Zionist settler pigs, even though Jews are native to the land, only puts a target on all Jews. And I won't fucking stand for that. Stop supporting a false narrative and disgusting propaganda and start fighting against anti-Semitism. It is the oldest and yet most prevalent cancer in the world. Your words have consequences, and those consequences include the deaths of innocent Jews and Palestinians alike. Thank you. Well, that was tough to say. It's a pretty personal issue. I know it's personal for you as well, Yan.
Yes. Before coming here, obviously I'm on the same social networks that everybody is, and you see not only that there's a very clearly one-sided depiction of what's happening and that it's, fully propagating falsehoods, but then you have celebrities chiming in, and it's just very harmful to both sides.
Yeah, it's unfortunately very, very, very sad. I mean, there's not much else we can say, and all we can hope for is peace, and hope that people will condemn terrorism and violence on all sides. So let's now move on to our weekly update, starting with a Mount Allison professor suspended. Professor Rima Azar from Mount Allison University was suspended without pay following complaints about her blog. In her blog, she stated that Canada is not a racist country and that BLM is a radical organization. She will also be asked to take equity, diversity, and inclusion training at the university's expense. She has started a GoFundMe campaign to cover the legal costs. Now, Mark Mercer, head of the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship, said they should have explained to the students that these are ideas and opinions that the professor is expressing, and if they wish to rebuke them, they are free to do so, and leave it at that. So, do you guys think that she should have been suspended, Anna?
Absolutely not. I think that it is completely irrational what this university is doing. Honestly, people should be able to express themselves. It was on her blog in the end of the day, like she wasn't teaching this in academia. And still, you can argue that parts of Black Lives Matter as an organization can be radical. That's real. And second, racism is something that you're going to find in every country on earth, to a less or a larger degree. And, I don't think that Canada particularly is a racist country, because otherwise, how come many minorities come here? How come that we're a country that is full of immigrants and receiving more immigrants? If we come here, it's because we know that we can get a future here and a better life than what we have. So I feel very welcome as an immigrant in Canada. Many of my friends do as well, from different backgrounds. And, I actually think that yes, we are lucky to be here.
Wow, okay. And Yan, what do you think about it? Do you think that the professor should have been suspended?
So I think there's two sides to this. I actually looked this up because I was very curious to see what it is exactly that she said. So there's a CBC article, there's a CTV article, there's a Global News article, and if you go to the Global News one, where they actually cite what she said, and she Specifically, she criticized Hamilton, Ontario, for an apartheid-style COVID-19 vaccination policy of prioritizing people of color. So I'm assuming she's talking about the fact that in Hamilton they decided to separate who gets to be vaccinated first based on race, because their statistics show that people of color are likelier to have COVID because of low socioeconomic status and everything else that comes with being a person of color in our society. And it's obviously saying that is problematic in many ways. Number one, we don't say that Toronto is being ageist because we vaccinate older people first. So that's number one. Number two, comparing something like that to an apartheid is like comparing something else to the Holocaust. Two completely different things and irrelevant. And it just shows, in my opinion, a certain distasteful lack of understanding of what racism is. And I think that just because she posted it on her blog and not, maybe said it in the classroom does not necessarily preclude her from being wrong. So that's number one. Number two, we have to remember that we are not aware of what kind of contract she has with the university, right? This is a private entity. So she could have been in violation of some sort of code of conduct. And as a professor, there could be possibly some sort of statement in her contract where you are not allowed to say things that could damage the student body, right? There's intent versus impact. She could not have intended to hurt them, but the fact is that so many complaints have been submitted to the university that the university, being her employer and being responsible for the students' satisfaction, had to take steps to punish her.
Well, in this case, the professor was fired because the student union received a lot of complaints, and that was the result of her firing. So, I mean, do you think that this Mark Mercer, the head of Society for Academic Freedom, has a point, though? If they don't like her ideas, they should debate it?
I really have a very specific point to say about this. It's specifically his use of the word idea. In my opinion, ideas are things that push us forward into society. So, for example, an idea, it can be controversial, right? So an idea is like, let's prioritize green energy over oil. It's pure in its heart, but it has difficulties with it, right? Because our economy is based on the oil industry. Whereas what she said is based on ignorance. This kind of statement of comparing what Hamilton is doing to apartheid is based on ignorance. So in my view, it's not an idea. It's an opinion based on being misinformed and being, unfortunately, subtly racist.
I don't think that saying that is racist, and the reason is because I don't think you being from a different color makes you have a less strong immune system. You know what I mean? Sorry, but living in poverty doesn't mean that you will get COVID either. And certainly, I think that culture can impact because, for example, for Hispanics, I'm honest with myself. I'm very likely to have more COVID than my white friends because I still seeing my other Latino friends. Like, we're very touchy people. So cultural background, sure, can impact and can make some people more likely to get COVID than others. But that doesn't mean that the only people that should be prioritized are based on if they are immunocompromised or if they are older people because COVID can kill them. That's a reality.
But we can't really ignore the fact that people of color tend to be in a lower socioeconomic status. That means
and what does that mean?
That means having lower income. That means
and what does that mean?
That means living in areas where they don't have access to
you have access to water in Canada. You have access to hand sanitizers. You have access to face masks. You have access to so many things in this country that, sorry, but I don't believe that.
To be fair, there are some communities, in particular Indigenous communities, that are struggling with not having the basic resources like clean water. And I
believe that in remote areas. Yeah, but Hamilton.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the problem. Just because it's not visible, just because it's not something that we can imagine in our heads, at the end of the day, Hamilton made that decision based on the statistics that they were receiving. And we can't sit here and say, well, they were wrong and skin color. No, nobody's saying that it's the skin color that's causing the immunodeficiency. I don't think anybody is laboring under this delusion. I think it's the socioeconomic cost of being a person of color.
I think it's culturally. If you're more likely to meet your friends and touch your friends, you are more exposed to COVID.
Perhaps you're right.
But that doesn't make, for example, because in that reason, then Hispanics should be prioritized too.
You know what? Even if this is false, to still compare this to apartheid?
No, yeah, that's absurd.
You know
I
what
must
I
agree
mean?
with you.
You know what I mean?
That's ridiculous.
So should she have been fired for that?
She hasn't been fired, but
She
yeah,
hasn't been
comparing
fired.
one thing
She's
to...
been suspended, right? Suspended
Yeah.
for one term. They did decide not to pay her. It's very contestable. There's a lot of things we don't know. It's a private entity. We don't know what kind of contract they have with her. So,
Okay. Well, it's nice that you guys ended on common ground. So let's move on to our second item in our weekly update, something that Anna's very passionate about. And there she is. Very happy. It is the Miss Universe Pageant 2020. So the pageant will be taking place May 16th, 2021. It's taking place more than a year after the original pageant date because of COVID. It'll happen at the Seminole Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Hollywood, Florida, hosted by Mario Lopez and Olivia Culpa, Pitbull set to perform. The question is, do you guys... You're laughing over there.
I just love that Pitbull is the performer.
In Miami, of course.
I mean, I will, to be completely honest with you, yes, I've been to a Pitbull concert.
Me too, but I didn't pay
okay.
for it. So
I didn't pay for it either. I got
Oh.
tickets to the Pan Am.
Wait, you were
We
there?
were there when Kanye had his whole
when he
moment.
threw the mic up.
am I the only one who has no idea what you're talking about?
I know what they're talking about, but I wasn't here.
It was a Pitbull, Kanye West, and
Serena
Serena
Ryder.
Ryder
Oh my God.
concert.
How
The
are we just
three-
discovering this
That's
now?
hilarious. But the three, it was the weirdest concert
Yeah.
I've ever been to in my entire life. Ever. Like,
Okay, so now here's the question. Pauly D or Pitbull? Because you hated Pauly D in our
see,
election
Pauly D
special.
just irks me. Pitbull is Mr. Worldwide. I'm going to go with Pitbull.
Pitbull, you'd rather see...
I mean,
he's actually
he's-
not really good live, in my opinion.
No, but he's just so funny, and
The songs are catchy.
the songs
very
are catchy, and he's one of those like fun Latino characters like Bad Bunny, even though you don't really like them, part of you does, that kind of thing.
Look at Elliot is like disagreeing totally because he doesn't like Bad Bunny at all.
Well, I just find it... this is live, guys. This is why the show's live. Me and Christina just realized we were in the same room. How many years ago was it?
It was
6 years
high
ago.
school,
It was
or
2015.
yeah.
2015. Okay.
Yeah.
So bringing it back to Miss Universe pageant, do you think we should be having pageants in 2021? Beauty pageants?
Absolutely yes. I mean,
Why?
Because Venezuela wins. That's a reason.
Okay.
No.
Just Chile, do they even compete?
Yes, and
They
she's so
do?
beautiful. The one this year.
Amazing. I was going to say, I don't even think that they participate, but I guess they do.
Well, I hope they don't stay close to their name. I hope they bring the heat and don't keep it chilly.
Oh,
Such a bad
Elliot.
joke.
You're
know
a
what?
dad at heart, aren't you?
Yeah,
I am.
honestly, like
You know, that and my 6 kids. But let's talk. So what do you think, Yan? Do you think we should be having pageants?
Honestly, these are adults competing in competitions, and they're doing this with consent, so why not? I don't see any child beauty pageants. No.
And honestly, like one of the things that I use as an example is that, for example, in the case of the Miss Venezuela, many women who come from like really poor backgrounds, when they make it to the contest, then they become models, they become actresses. These are women who literally like overcome barriers, you know?
Okay.
So this kind of contest can be an opportunity for these people too.
Interesting. Okay. I think that's a fair point. We're going to leave it at that. And now we've got our main topic, which is diversity and inclusion. Canada is known for its diversity and multiculturalism. Home to over 250 ethnic origins, we are considered one of the most welcoming and open places in the world. However, to what point does inclusion go? Today, we hear more and more about the need for diversity, whether it's in the film and television industry, or in the corporate workplace through gender quotas, or even the language we use when discussing minorities. Are we becoming too inclusive, or is it just a small step in the work needed to be even more inclusive? And about exclusion, does too much inclusion create exclusion, or does it completely eliminate it? Tonight, with our guest Yan, our team examines the societal shift towards more inclusion and whether we're going in the right direction. As always, we are live on Facebook, so make sure to comment on our feed to have your thoughts read live on air. Let's begin. So, number one, does diversity matter? Anna?
I think that diversity is a good thing for society in regards that, nations that are used to receiving immigrants tend to be more open. Like, I saw that, I have seen this in the case of the Venezuelan diaspora in South America. Like, the nations in South America that are more used to receiving immigrants in the past, they were more welcoming of Venezuelans, like, for example, Argentina. But nations that have been more close to immigration, they were, like, the reaction that they have with these waves of immigrants haven't been as welcoming or as nice or friendly, So I think diversity can bring good things to society. I come from a very diverse country too, so yes.
Okay. Christina?
I agree. I think diversity is important. And I think Canada is a great example of why it's important. We have so many different kinds of people here, and I think that we live in a fairly happy society and we all get along, and there's not, luckily in Canada, we don't have a huge issue with, like certain racial groups not getting along or that sort of thing. For the most part, like, we're all very loving, we all get along, and I think that just goes to show how important it is to be inclusive. And I think diversity, just from a cultural standpoint, like, how fun is it? Like, and not even in a sarcastic way, that like you can live in a world where your neighbor is from one place and your other neighbor is from another, and there's so much, they bring so much. Like, look at Toronto, we've got Little Italy, Little Portugal, Chinatown. There's all the
Okay, so Jan, what do you think? Diversity important?
Absolutely. I don't think I can say anything that hasn't been said.
Okay. So then let's talk about forced diversity, and that's in regards to race or gender quotas. Do you support quotas for race and gender? Jan, I'm going to start with you.
So in an ideal society, no, we wouldn't have to do that. But if we look at society with the assumption of equal distribution, right? If you don't harbor any racist ideologies, you would agree with the statement that across all races, across all genders, across all sexes and nations, there is an equal distribution of skill, an interest to work, a desire to educate yourself, right? But we are not seeing that in the workplace. We're not seeing it in the States. We're not seeing it in Canada always. And the fact of the matter is that not all workplaces are headed by people who are good at heart, who would make sure that their boards of directors or their working environment in general is inclusive, just as it is outside in society and academia. So, if I may, I actually have an example where, because if we say, oh, why don't we just leave them alone? Why do we have to legislate this? Why can't we just let it happen naturally? Well, very recently, completely accidentally, I read about how the LA Times exposed the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, which is the organization that is responsible for the Golden Globes, the award ceremony. And there's a voting body, and they have exposed that the entire voting body does not contain one single black person. And it's funny because for many years prior, the Golden Globes have come under fire for being discriminatory in the people that they nominate, that there's not enough people of color, etc. And now we find out that, in fact, their voting body is very much lacking in diversity.
Okay. Now, Anna, what do you think? Do you think that gender and race quotas are important?
I actually find them quite offensive, to be honest with you. I don't like the idea of people being selected based on their race or ethnicity or religious affiliation. I find that if someone selects you for a role, you should be selected based on your skills. And I also find, and same for example with gender, and I also think that in Canada it's very weird because, I come from a very diverse country. I used to work in an office, actually, back in Venezuela, where everyone was female. Literally, everyone was female. And in my previous job, I never had to fill out a questionnaire where they asked me if I was a woman or if I was a person of color or if I was a LGBT or, person. Nothing at all. So I find very bizarre to come to a society where, this is so important. It's like, why are you so interested in the identity of people,
I agree. There was actually something that was going around on Twitter. This girl had shared, she was putting out some job applications, and while she was filling it out, she came across one of the questions, and it asked her what shade her skin was. So not only did it ask if she was a person of color or a Caucasian person, it then asked, are you fair to light? Are you medium to dark? Are you tanned with yellow undertones? Whatever it is. Or all the way to, are you very dark skinned? That to me is so bizarre, and it's almost creepy that in a way that these employers are so concerned with who you are in terms of not much more than appearance. At this point, we understand men and women are both equally capable.
Most people would
say that we can for the most part do the same jobs, and we can both do a good job. So I don't think that I do feel like when it comes to quotas, it is in some sense it's almost like discouraging, because I don't want to apply to a job and know that the only reason they decide, or one of the main reasons they decide to hire me, is because I'm a Latino or because I'm a woman. I want to be hired based on my skill set and the work that I produce. Yeah. But I do agree that there in some cases it may be necessary, because not necessarily necessary, but that I can understand where these companies come from, considering, like, you look at all these businesses that are dominated by white people and they preach diversity and inclusion, but they're just a whole team of white people. So I understand there's some flaws in our system. But
does diversity always have to mean race and gender?
No,
because
it can mean,
you can talk about intellectual diversity, which is the point of this show. Yeah,
and I mean, when I talk about diversity in that sense, I mean in terms of appearance. We do want to make sure that not all the major companies are run only by white men or whatever it is. We do want to make sure that there's some level of diversity in terms of it's not necessarily, I don't know how to explain it, but I mean, I do think that diversity of what was it that you called it?
Race and gender diversity quotas?
No,
intellectual diversity.
Intellectual diversity. I do think that's the most important, because we need, as a people, like, if you work in a job that requires you to be a team, you need to have intellectual diversity, because you need to have different skill sets and different strong suits, so that you guys can be successful. You can't all be exactly the same, doing the same thing, with all the same knowledge. There does need to be some diversity so you can get things moving.
But if I may, I feel like there's being a little bit of a false dichotomy. You guys are saying that if there is to be a diversity of thought, then there can't be diversity of ethnicity or diversity of gender expression.
No,
they're not opposites.
No,
right?
I agree.
They're not opposites at all. So you could, yes, theoretically, you could have 7 white men that think differently, or 7 non-white men that think alike. But do we ever really sit there and have to choose between the two? Are people really just hiring, let's say, a black person from the street simply because they're black, or do they look at it as a tiebreaker? You have a person who is black or gay or just not white or straight and a person who is white and straight, and they have the same skill set. And if all the rest of the people, or the majority of the rest of the people on the board or whatever the workplace is, are white, what's the harm? What is the harm in adding a person who comes from a different experience, from a different culture, and is introducing a whole new richness?
No, nothing at all. There's nothing wrong. Actually, it can bring a lot of value because it brings a different cultural perspective, which can be important for business, as a matter of fact.
Right. And I also would like to reiterate that, in my opinion, specifically about race quotas, I think that if we're talking about, I don't know, a condominium board of directors, perhaps it's not as important. But in places where laws are being made that affect people's lives and rights and access to healthcare, that representation and gender and race quotas, or whatever you want to call it, are important. Because, you know, whether we like it or not, every 4 years there's an election in America where they are, you know, the right side is far more radical than ours. People who are, you know, part of the LGBTQ community have to fear for their rights. Is there enough representation from the LGBTQ community in the government? Should we perhaps make a quota? That sounds kind of radical, right? But is it?
But do you think that LGBTQ people have to fear just because of the right side?
I don't think they have to fear. I know they have to fear. They constantly speak about it, especially in America. It's not it really is not whether I think it is. It's absolutely is. People who are trans have to fear for their rights. Just 10 years ago, people who were openly gay couldn't serve in the military in the United States. Now it's trans people. So again, it's very much a reality where, and I can speak on behalf of myself because I'm a member of the gay community, but I can speak about people of color and their experience. But I am certain, and I don't think this is so out of the blue, that they also have to fear for themselves.
But do you represent everyone in the community? Because there would be a lot of people who would disagree with you. For example, Zahavi, who was on our show, is a conservative.
Mm-hmm. That is very much a good point. Is that you know what you said earlier, that why do we have to sacrifice diversity of thought for ethnic diversity? Well, black people are not a monolith. As you said so yourself, there's black people who are conservatives, black people who are Democrats, there's gay people who are conservative, gay people that are Democrats. So you're not really sacrificing diversity of thought by hiring people who are not white.
I do agree with that, and I think that's a good point, that the two aren't different. They kind of go hand in hand, because you can be Black or Latino or white and think differently, and be part of an intellectually diverse group of workers.
So the question remains, though, what's more important, diversity, ethnic diversity, or diversity of thought? Because in California, there is a new law that to all domestic or foreign companies with its principal office in California, under the law, companies are required to increase diversity for underrepresented people, including Blacks, African Americans, Hispanics, Latinos, Asians, Native Americans, and members of the LGBTQ community. 2 years ago, California mandated that at least one board member has to be a female. California companies have to meet specific requirements. By the end of 2021, all boards must have one underrepresented member. By the end of 2022, boards with 9 or more members must have 3 underrepresented members, while boards with 5 to 8 members must have 2 underrepresented members. Companies that do not meet these requirements will be subject to penalties of $100,000 to $300,000. So,
I think it's one thing that's important is an argument that a lot of people bring up about the whole gender and racial quota thing is that, and I agree with it to some extent, that it's discouraging and you're only selecting people based on their gender or their race or their sexual or gender identity. But on the other side, I think what's important is that we shouldn't act like it's that hard to find a Black person or an Indigenous person who has the exact same skill set as a white person. You know, it's actually way easier than we think. So I think one thing we have to consider is, why is it that there are people who apply to jobs who have the same skill set, who are just as strong as the white candidate, but the white candidate is selected? I think that's something we need to consider, because...
Do you think that's strictly because of race every single time?
I don't think every time, no. And I think it kind of just ties into many of our other episodes.
There are a lot of different aspects. One of the aspects, for example, that I want to add is language barriers or accents.
Yeah.
That's a big thing.
And I think that I don't think that companies or leaders of companies at this point in time, and especially in this country, are intentionally not hiring underrepresented groups. I mean, I do think that there probably are a select group, maybe more than we realize, but I also think that we are a lot more, inclusive than we realize. Like
Well, you don't see these types of things, like you said, Anna, you don't see these types of things in Venezuela. There are no diversity quotas there.
No, there's no diversity quotas, and to be honest, everyone could get their job regarding their race or their gender, like it wasn't a big thing.
Well, is it fair though to compare the US and California to Venezuela? I don't know much about Venezuela, but I feel like
that's true. We're more racially mixed. That's another thing. That's true.
If the way I look at this law is, again, as I said, if you assume equal distribution of skill and intent and whatever else you like to call it, talent, we should be seeing people of color and different genders on these boards of directors of these companies anyway. But the fact of the matter is that it doesn't happen, as the Golden Globes example. It just doesn't happen. And sometimes you have to legislate things to make...
But if they're private entities, don't you think that they should have the right to decide?
Right, but we can't ignore the fact that it has an impact on people's lives. The fact that...
But it's different public versus private company, right?
Exactly.
Right, but that there's no less private than there are public companies. The fact of the matter, they still employ people. And whether... I'm not sure if this is all of what the law is. I think the bigger the company and the more impact it has on the economy, the higher stakes it has, the more inclusive the board of directors has to be. But in general, it's a little tricky, I'll be honest, because from this wording, for example, you can't tell, it says 1 in 3, or with boards with 5 to 8 members, they have to have 2 underrepresented. So does that mean that the majority will still always be white, or are they okay with the entire board being non-white? So it's a little unclear.
But also, you look at demographics, right? If the demographics aren't equal, how should boards be
exactly
equal?
That's something that I want to add, and is that, for example, if you go to a company in China, how are going to be the board? Chinese. If you go to a board in India, how is going to be the board? Indian. The reality is that the majority of the population, but still the majority of people in America is white. That's another reality.
Okay, so I completely hear you, but the fact is, if we really do go, for example, trans people, they comprise 1% of the population, and they represent even less than 1% in the workforce, in the media, and whatever, Hollywood. And it's all about visibility at the end of the day. It's all about setting a positive example that black kids, that gay kids can look up to, whether it's in companies or in Hollywood. If we just completely let it go how it has been going, time and time again, it's not going to spontaneously fix itself and become diverse.
Well, here's the thing that I wanted to bring up based on last week's episode. So I ran a poll on Instagram that says, do you believe society cares more about someone's skin color or the value they bring to the world? The poll was 46% skin color, 54% skills and values. However, when I asked, do you care more about someone's skin color or the value they bring to the world? Out of 50 people, only one person said they care about skin color. So everyone else said they care about skills and values. So when people talk about society being racist, if individuals are not racist, what part of society...
It is a small sample size, and it is...
But the sample size is diverse too.
But it is a little bit anecdotal as well, right? We do
most stuff is anecdotal.
Of course. But we can't ignore the fact that America is having a racism crisis, and we can sit until the end of today and talk about how, and ideally we shouldn't be forcing anybody to hire.
I agree with you that there is a race crisis, not only in North America, but the way that I see it is that people are obsessed with race.
Some people's lives are at stake, Some people can't walk down the street or run past the red light without fearing that they're going to be stopped and shot because of how their race is perceived.
But I think that the more you focus on race and the more you see people based on their bucket you place them, you're not going to fix this issue.
I feel like that your narrative is very correct. I feel like we should place all the people who attack black people and attack queer people, and let's tell them that. But let's not tell black people and queer people that they should somehow feel responsible for all the bad things that happen to them.
No, they shouldn't be responsible. You're only responsible for your individual actions. If you do things wrong, obviously, your life is not going to go to a good place. If you act in a correct way, your life should go to a good place. But what I'm trying to say is that, I never seen a society that is more obsessed with race and identity than North America.
That is also very true. And even like we think that we're obsessed with race here. It's even like the obsession is, there's so much of it in America. The obsession over race. Do
you mind if I ask what do you mean by obsession?
Obsession, when I say that, I mean the
everything is about race.
Everything is about race. Everything you do in life is about race. And look, if I were a black man who was fearing for my life, my life probably would be about race, because I'd have a lot, it would be something I was thinking about a lot. But I mean it in a sense that we put so much emphasis on what group somebody belongs to. We make it so important to put them into a category and to put them into a box. And not to say that isn't important in some sense. Like I like being in the boxes that I've put in. I like being a woman, and I'm happy to be.
There's nothing wrong with being happy with who you are.
Of course. I just think that when I say that North America, and when Anna says it, are so concerned about race, it's that we've almost gotten to a place where we're starting to create problems that don't exist. And I mean that in the sense that a lot of issues, or a lot of things that we claim to be issues, like lack of diversity, aren't as bad as we think.
Based on what, if I may?
Well, I can give a quick example before I come back to you. Recently, there were Band-Aids that came out to match skin colors so that people wouldn't feel like they're underrepresented. Mm-hmm. But was that a major concern, that Band-Aids were all just a similar color?
Who does that harm, if I may? Who does that hurt?
Who does what hurt?
Who does releasing Band-Aids with different skin tones, who does it hurt?
I don't think
other than making people feel more accepted and more
I don't think that I will feel accepted if the Band-Aid is my skin color.
That matches my skin tone.
You are fine, but you are fine not to think that, but other people do. But that's an assumption. Other people clearly do not feel that same way.
But that's an assumption too. It's all about assumption.
That's not an assumption. But the Band-Aids have been released, means that there was outcry. There was a need for them.
There was a need for marketing.
I can give another example in terms of
again, who does it hurt? Who does it hurt?
No, it doesn't hurt anybody.
But at what point do you keep going more and more inclusive? Because if you look at everything through a lens of racism, everything will be racist.
To the point of who does it hurt? If it doesn't hurt anybody, and it only helps those marginalized communities, why do we have to ask the question?
But do you think that everybody in a marginalized community wants a Band-Aid of that color? Like
I don't think so.
No, they don't have to have a 100% consensus on that. But if there's enough people that are saying, "Hey, we want this," why do we have to sit here and think, "Well, we have we don't have limited resources of Band-Aids. We don't have limited resources of pigments to put in Band-Aids or whatever."
Oh, don't get me wrong. If someone wants to buy the Band-Aid and I'm the company elaborating the Band-Aids, like from a marketing point of view, if I can sell more Band-Aids, for sure I will do the Band-Aids.
Right.
But I don't think that everyone is like, oh no, I need to have a Band-Aid of my skin color. Like,
I don't think that's the case.
I don't think that's the main concern of a
I don't
human
think
being.
that's their main concern at all. I think their main concern is being killed in the streets for doing random things, right? But such a small thing as a Band-Aid, like, a question. Why are we even talking about it then if it's not a big deal? You know what I mean?
But that's the point. If it's so small, why do we need it?
Why do we talk about it if it's so small?
Because
it's such
it came
a small
out.
thing. Right, but it's so small it helps them, doesn't hurt us. So why are we talking about it? With hiring people, gender quotas, I can understand because there's this argument that we're not hiring a person because of their scale. We can talk about that. But something as innocent as a Band-Aid, who does it harm?
I agree that it doesn't harm anyone, and I personally don't have any issues with Band-Aid coming out with whatever skin tone Band-Aids they'd like to. And if that's a request from the public, I think go for it. They should do that. Just to go back to, you're asking me what I mean when I say obsessed with race, I will say here in Canada, white men are obsessed with knowing where I'm from. They're obsessed with knowing what my background is. Where are you from? Speak Spanish. Do this, do that. If I went,
that's gross.
It's gross. It's gross, but it is one of the most common things that somebody like me deals with when it comes to attraction from men. It's an obsession with, oh, your father's Chilean, you're half Latina. Oh, please speak Spanish. That must be why you look the way that you do. That must be why your body's shaped the way that it is. If I went to South America, nobody would ask me to speak Spanish. Nobody would highlight that because of where I'm from. That's what makes me attractive. But here, the men do that. And I do think that it ties into this bigger picture of, I think North America predominantly has an issue with fetishizing minorities. Asian women, Latina women, Black women. There's like communities of white men in North America that fetishize them. I'm not saying all, of course, but there is, that's what I mean when I say obsessed with race, is that things that I face as a woman here in terms of obsession over who I am wouldn't happen to me in South America or somewhere else.
Misogyny, though.
Yeah.
That's misogyny, though. That's not the experience that you've had. I agree, are gross. Nobody has to go through that. But that's fetishizing that individual man making these gross decisions.
Yeah.
Does that reflect on the whole society
of
being
course.
obsessed with race? I think they're quite different things.
No,
I think
agree.
I think that is also the concept of identity. Like using again South America. Like if you're an Afro-Venezuelan, if you are race mixed Venezuelan, if you're white Venezuelan, no one will expect that you had to behave differently because of your skin color. Here, people are like, how can I do this? No, you need to do that because you're Black. No, if you're Latina, you probably know how to dance. If you are like Asian, then you have other stereotypes. And everyone loves to put in people in buckets. And what if you are race mixed? For example, I watched this TV show where these kids are conflicted because my white identity and my Black identity. And it's like, let individuals behave the way they want. Don't focus so much about race or whatever. Like, let people live.
And in regards to fetishization of people, in China, white women are fetishized.
White women are like fetishized a lot of places.
And in the Middle East too, advertisements will have white women there to show that, you can be like this. So I don't think it's unique to North America.
No, I don't, and I don't mean it. I don't mean it in the sense that it's unique. I mean it in this like, and I could be wrong because obviously the only experience I really have is here. I do just think that the emphasis that our society in the Western world puts on race is far greater than we do in other, or than society does in other places. I mean, yes, China fetishizes white women. The Middle East.
The concept of exotic, what people consider exotic. For example,
a white woman is not exotic to even
in
Canada, but even in the Middle East, I don't think that they consider it a white woman exotic. I could be wrong, but that exotic term that gets thrown around, like, my God, if I took a shot every time I heard the word "you're exotic," I would be absolutely smashed.
Okay.
Right, okay.
Well, you're exotic. So. Let's pivot a little and talk about critical race theory, because that's something that's big in the news. They're proposing it in the States, and it basically puts race in a very critical point of view, that almost anything should be based on race. So what do you guys think about critical race theory? Yan?
Okay, well, to be honest, I had to look this up a couple of days ago, and I'll be upfront, I don't know much about it. I haven't read enough. I have read the two important tenets of the critical race theory, one being that white supremacy is real and that it exercises its power through law, and then the other is that racial emancipation and anti-subordination are possible. Basically, that we can evolve into a society where race is not a thing and misogyny and sexism are not a thing either. I mean, based on that, I agree with it, and I think anybody would agree with it. Again, I don't know enough about everything else that critical race theory purports. So I almost don't feel comfortable commenting further.
Okay. Anna?
I just think that if we want race to stop being a thing, then we should stop focusing so much on race. Like, that's the way to go. If you start putting people, in their heads that if your race is this, you should behave this way. If your race is that, you should behave that way, then we're always going to see in color. And I never saw in color as much as when I moved here.
Okay, so let's talk about then language, because language is one of the things that especially Christina and Anna wanted to talk about. Does the language we use when discussing inclusion matter? Specifically, I'm going to start with the term LatinX. You might have heard that thrown around a lot, and Christina and Anna have some major thoughts about that. Christina, over to you.
Okay, so I have a few things that I do not like about Latinx, and I've wanted to talk about this forever, and I've never had a chance to. This is my issue with Latinx. That term does not translate in Spanish. That is not a Spanish word.
What about Latine? Wasn't there another version, Latine, gender neutral Latine?
But that still
doesn't exist either.
That doesn't exist in Spanish. So
Right.
An issue that I have with Latinx is that it is only inclusive to English speakers. I do think that there's an importance in preserving language, and maybe that makes me a right-wing fascist or whatever you want to, even though I'm a lefty. I'm going to have someone in the comments telling me I'm a right-wing Nazi because I think that preserving language can be important in some aspects. I think it's unfair to like the actual Latin culture and the Spanish language, the culture, the history, our ancestors. That our language is very
it's gendered. It's male and female.
And that's the other thing. All Latin languages are gendered.
Mm-hmm.
So first
Just
of
like
all,
French.
Exactly. Latinx is not a word in Spanish. So and the other thing is, I can almost guarantee you, no, it wasn't a Latino person who came up with that term.
Actually, that's what I want to jump in.
It's not a Latino person who created that word.
I actually decided to make a poll last night, and most of my contacts on Instagram are Hispanics. Not even one. Well, I think one of them was the one that said Latinx represents me, and the guy then texted me, "Sorry, I pushed that button by mistake." Legit, So no one supported Latinx. But
so, and this is, and please understand that this is coming from two women who are part of that community, that it is a word that mostly woke white women have decided to take over and use and push.
Why?
Because there's some obsession that, and I'm generalizing here, but a lot of the people that you see going hysterical online are white women defending minorities and speaking for them and virtual signaling. So, and don't tell me I'm wrong, because they are the people who are pushing all this kind of language are white women predominantly, and they're trying to be woke and be allies, and it's not needed, and it's a lot of the time it's incorrect. And you can ask, the majority of the Latinos I know do not use that term and do not wish to use that term. The gender neutral term for us, or for people as a group, is Latinos. That's the gender neutral
or Hispanic
term. Or
Hispanic is gender
And
neutral, actually.
And if people want to understand why, I can explain it. It's the same in French. In the language, if there's at least one man within the group, it becomes masculine. So
which isn't misogynistic. People will say it's just the way that the language works. If
I may chime in, a question, and please tell me if I'm wrong. Does the term Latinx, does that mean that every person who is Latin has to identify that way?
No, but it's but I'm online and I'm being told that I'm part of the Latinx community. I didn't
Okay, but you can also just say no. It's kind of the same way where a straight person could be mistaken for being gay, and they just say that they're not.
The thing is that
my question
it
is
affects
people
identity in
people
that
who
sense.
but whose identity? People who want to be identified as Latinx because in their mind it is gender neutral because Latinos still is patriarchal, whether or not it is because you want to conserve
It's the language.
Okay, but it is still patriarchal, right?
And you're
we
not
say
going to
everything
kill the
we want to
patriarchy.
conserve the language, but language changes and times change. But
No,
the
no.
most important thing is that people can choose what they want to use.
No. Language change, and the Spanish language have changed so much that you have no idea. The Spanish language have like 1,000 words that come from Arabic. One of the example is pantalon. The Spanish word has nahuatl, like traditional native Mexican language. The Spanish word has so many words from each country in Latin America, including native words. You know how the language doesn't change when it comes from intellectual progressive who try to tell other people from other group how to identify. That's not how the
So
language
there are
changes.
no Latin people who identify as Latinx.
I'm not saying
is what
that
you're
there's.
saying.
I'm not saying that there's none.
So there
What
are. Okay.
I'm sure that there are. But what I'm saying is that most of the Latinos I know do
I'm
not
not
use
going
that
to.
term.
Sample
and
size. Your anecdotal
sample
evidence.
size, but I'm.
But
I'm
so
an-
is yours.
I've got an.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Do you
I'm
know
not,
any Latinos who use Latinx?
No, absolutely not. But that doesn't mean that they don't exist.
No,
you
but
guys
so
say
what
that
I'm
they do
saying,
exist.
but what
We're
I'm
using
saying,
statistics.
well, what I'm
Sorry?
saying is
We are
that,
using a statistic like you can
But-
Google.
but what you're saying,
Just because
is
there's less of them doesn't mean that
But-
they don't
Hold on,
exist.
let's let Christina
to,
finish.
to be fair, I think that Anna and I come from our perspective is not one looking from the outside. We are literally inside this community. So it's not like this is an outside perspective.
But do you
So-
represent the entire Latin
no,
community?
of course
But
not.
that's the same
The
thing,
same
but
way
it-
that you don't represent the entire white male population or the entire gay man population. That is, and that's the same with us. We don't represent an entire
So-
group, but we speak from the perspective of two people
And-
who have hundreds, I'm sure, of family members. And I can't name and let me tell you, Latinos, there are hundreds of us in a family, and not one of them that I know out of
And-
my hundreds of family members and hundreds of friends use that word.
Same.
And I want to bring up something you said. You said to a bunch of things. Who is it hurting? Well, it's hurting people in the community. So
And I will explain you, let me add why it feels like hurting them. And the reason why it feels is because this is coming from the Anglo community. This is coming from the North Americans. This is not coming from Latinos who speak Spanish and who were born in South America or the Caribbean or Latin America in general. This is coming from North American population. What does people feel like? Imperialism in language. That's how it feels. It feels like it's someone from another country that also believes it's morally superior to us is telling us how to identify.
And that's another a big issue is this originated in North America, which is not a Latin country or a Latin continent. We Canada and America cannot speak for all Latinos, yet they're the ones that created this Latinx term. This was not something brewed in South America. This was something that
it's being imposed on you by people who aren't Latino.
It's only inclusive for people who understand English or are English speakers. It's not inclusive to the actual community. Latinx is not a word. Latin A is not a word. Every language is gendered. Every Latin language especially. Yes, languages can progress, but there's certain languages outside of English that are not as easy to tweak. There's not as many options for switching words up and changing their spelling. It's not as easy as it is in English.
So let's move on, unless there's anything else you two wanted to add about Latinx.
I was just going to comment another X word. Womsen.
Oh.
Womxn.
Womxn. You don't like that word?
No. Because,
Why?
because woman comes from the term human, as does man. Man comes from the word human. That has been the word since the beginning of time. And I think that we have a lot more to be concerned about in terms of inclusion than dismantling the word man. I don't hate men, and I don't like that we live in a culture that does, and we villainize men. And look, the current day man did not make any languages. They are speaking the same language as you, and we shouldn't villainize them and make them feel like they need to do something about it and change the language. This is how we speak. human is the same word across all Latin languages. That's the word that they use. It's not patriarchal. It's a language.
Okay,
Humanity, human, whatever.
So let's move on then to a different word, and this would pertain more to you, Yan. And it's the term LGBTQIA2S+. It's an acronym that stands for those who don't know, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, intersex, asexual, and two-spirit. So the question is, what happened to just LGBT or the LGBTQ community? Because that's what it used to be. And now all of these other identities are added to this acronym. So what do you think about the acronym's job? It's supposed to make things shorter. Are these letters necessary?
I think what happened is it got more descriptive. Over time, the queer community started feeling a little bit more perhaps accepted in the world. And over time, they have recognized that there's these other identities that have not been at the forefront. And, if you have no stake in the community, then again, why do you care if there are other letters?
I agree with that.
The letters that have been added, I guess, from LGBT is queer or questioning. There's intersex and there's two-spirit. Two-spirit is about Native people, and it's like if you don't want to say it, I think that you can most of the time get away with by saying respectfully the queer community, not the queers, but the queer community. Yeah. If you don't want to say it, you don't have to say it. At the end of the day, it's just more descriptive. It's just more recognizing, and it's all about visibility.
And I do want to say that I think that there's many people from the queer community who would say they're not going to villainize you for not including every letter when you're referring to the community. If for the most part, that's terminology that's used like in official documentation amongst the community themselves. But I don't think that they're going to start a riot because you accidentally forgot to include the I. So I think that, and I mean, of course, there's going to be some people who will, but I do think that many people from the queer community are understanding that it's a lot to memorize. They don't expect you to know every term and every word.
But also, if you're like watching this and you have absolutely no idea how to go about this, and it all comes down to this: do you want to be, as weird as it sounds, do you want to be looked at favorably? Do you want to be looked at as inclusive? Then yes, go ahead and memorize these letters. If you couldn't care less, if you think that you have no friends or no family members that you know about that are part of this community, then by all means, just don't bother. At the end of the day, nobody is forcing anybody to say anything. You can act the way you want to act, but there will be consequences.
What consequences?
Well, it depends. It depends, right? If you're being outright homophobic, there will be consequences.
But some people would.
If you act with intentional disregard and say, "Oh, two-spirit, I don't know what that is. I've never heard of it. Therefore, it doesn't exist." "Oh, transgender, I've never heard of it. That's shit. Sorry, that's rubbish. That doesn't exist." That kind of language still exists. There are still people out there who talk this language. I'm a musician. I work in the studio. There was a guy who came in and said a word to me thinking that I'm going to be of the same homophobic opinion. And it happens all the time. So those outward things, like if you talk like that, then by all means. But there will be consequences.
Okay, so let's talk about some more inclusive language. Specifically, we talked about this on the gender identity episode, and then we're going to move on to the future. The gender identity episode, we talked about pronouns in your bio. Now, Christina, Anna, and our guest Noah agreed that they don't want to have pronouns in their bios. People have said that that's in terms of inclusivity. What do you think about that?
I think if you don't want to, you don't have to. That's as simple as that.
Yep, I agree.
And I don't think there's a push necessarily.
No, but I will say that I've had former employers who do really highlight that and think that it's important. And in communication that I've had, and you just go through LinkedIn, people have it directly on their name. They'll have their and these are cis people, and I'm not saying that if they want to do that, by all means.
Again, it all goes back to being looked at favorably by the queer community.
Right,
That's
but I'm
think.
saying that the queer community isn't going to, shouldn't be at least, angry with me for not sharing my pronouns in my bio. So that's all I mean is that
it's not that they will be angry, it's just a way to show allyship.
Yeah, I know.
But that's inclusivity, and that's the question. How far do we go to be inclusive?
I don't think you should force and I don't think that my allyship is based off of whether or not I put my pronouns in my bio. I think, I haven't been able to go to the Pride Parade for the past 2 years because of COVID, but I go to the Pride Parade every single year, and I have since I was a child. My father had taken me to my first one at 4 years old. I am completely accepting and loving of this community. I do other things, activism, donating, all these kinds of things. So most of the charitable donations that I've made in my life are for the LGBTQ plus community. And I think that's my allyship. And I think whether or not I put a pride flag or my pronouns in my bio, that shouldn't determine my allyship, and that shouldn't determine how somebody from the community portrays me. They shouldn't think, oh, she's not inclusive because she doesn't have her pronouns. I'm an ally for sure.
I think, first of all, that the fact that you've been so involved is fantastic. And I absolutely agree that the he, him, or he, her, or her, hers pronouns are not the determining factor, is not what an ally make. But it's just a relatively small, harmless thing that you can choose to do. And I think we have to specify here, it's not really the queer community, it's really the trans community, right? Because trans people are the ones that struggle with being perceived for who they are and the way they feel. And it's, a person can go about their life and not feel the need, but then they might have a trans kid or a trans friend and a trans coworker, or an employer will have a trans employee, and they want to show support by asking the rest of their employee to do the relatively small step of adding their pronouns. Again, I don't think it will ever be, to the point of if you don't, you'll get fired. But again, it's a small, harmless step that you can take to show support for a very, very marginalized community.
I think that the best way to show support is to treat people with respect, no matter their gender or their sexual orientation. And, putting a she, her,
he, him.
That's it.
Yeah, I don't think, it probably, like, if you're a trans person, you see that, some trans might want to see that, then you have trans people like Noah who was like, I don't see the big issue with that. And, it is like, it against the pants, and honestly, just treat people with respect regardless of who they are.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's move on to the future. How inclusive are we going to get? So I do want to mention our poll that we asked our audience, and that was, do you think that inclusion has gone too far or not far enough? So what were the results of our poll, Christina, on Instagram?
So 67% of the votes said inclusion has gone too far, and 33% said inclusion has not gone far enough. I also conducted the poll on Reddit, but I gave 3 options. So I asked, have diversity and inclusion efforts gone too far, or does it still need work? 34% said too far, 49% said it still needs work, and 17% said it's fine as is.
I would definitely, if I could vote on that, I would say it could use work, because I don't think that inclusion is a checkbox that we have arrived at. It's something that we strive to, and we can always improve at.
And I think we work on over time. I agree that I think in some aspects we've gone too far when we really start isolating people based on their race and identity and gender, when we start to literally like dehumanize them based on those sorts of things. I think that's
that going too far in inclusion, or is that just being xenophobic or racist? Because
the thing is that the extremes sometimes touch each other. For example, I was reading the other day that I don't know if it was the University of Yale or something like that they wanted to lower the standards of admission tests based on Black and Latino students. And they are saying that in order to be inclusive. To me, it sounds racist. So
it's assuming that Black and Latino people are not going to achieve as high as the white population.
Exactly.
I agree with that. We should not be lowering the standards, because you're actually telling those groups of people, we expect you to be stupider than us, so we're going to lower the bar for you.
So what do you think about affirmative action? Oh, that got
That's
silent.
an example of affirmative action. That's a clear example.
But we can't sit here and ignore the fact that there are constraints for these communities to get into universities, and not because of their skill, but because of racism. Like what you guys said is right, but it's ignoring the fact that racism and bias exists in the workplace.
Yeah, it exists, but no, don't lower the standards in tests. Intellectually speaking, that's offensive.
And that's the other thing. And let's look at just even the world right now with everything online and schooling online. There's going to be a lot of your teachers who don't even know what you look like. And you're going to do just as, and as a person of color, you're going to do just as well as your white classmate, and nobody's going to have any idea what your race is.
But are we fixing the problem? So we're just saying just because the teacher can't see
I'm
you.
saying, and I think that's a community effort, and we need to start uplifting these communities and providing them with more resources. And I agree that there is a disparity in terms of access to education and other services like tutoring and getting loans for school, whatever it might be. But I think that telling Black people, Indigenous people, Latino people that they can have a lower grade point coming into university than white people is basically just, in my opinion, and I think this is what Anna was saying, is telling them that there's an already existing expectation that they're not as smart. And I do have an issue with that.
That's what I mean with the extremes touch each other, because these people in their attempt to be very inclusive are actually behaving like people who are very racist.
And that I agree that they're tackling it the wrong way. Instead of lowering the standards, we as a society should lift these people up, and that sounded really wrong.
Well, how do you do that? What would you suggest be the way to uplift them?
We have to tackle specific issues, the wage gap.
I think everything comes down to, money. That's what I think the thing comes down. And it is very important to highlight that everyone is going to face obstacles in life. In people in North America see it about race. In Latin America, we see it about class. People from socially lower status, they unfortunately have more obstacles than people who has money.
Absolutely.
The thing is that, that's the unfortunate reality of the world. We live in an unequal world. It's never going to be equal, unfortunately. And, sometimes you just have to do what you can with what you have. Never is going to be like, everyone is going to be, under the same, rate of difficulties. No, it's never going to happen.
Well, I think to take this stance is rather unproductive, because we just are telling people who are targeted for their races, just deal with it. It's not going to change. And what does that make us then? If we're not going to fight for them, how can we say?
No, I mean from the money point of view. I mean from the money point of view.
But that can be changed as well, because the money issue is really a race issue. It's the fact that Black people are perceived as less talented, less educated.
But is that you perceiving that, or is that the world?
Because there are Black people who have money.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they have as many opportunity as anyone else, because they can get tutoring, they can go to the expensive schools. Like, that's an example. There are Hispanic people who also have a lot of money. So, the reality is that the opportunity is usually monetary.
Right, but that does not negate the fact that Black people are facing a racial problem. Just because a rich Black person does not mean that just because they've managed to break their glass ceiling, like how.
Well, that's something that Christina mentioned on the previous episode. You said you can be a successful Black man, but that doesn't change the fact that racism is still a problem. You said that on the show.
Right. And one thing I do want to say is that if we're looking at it from a perspective of living in Canada, I went through school entirely in the public school system. I never went to private school.
Too.
I never took a private school course, and I, as a minority, you can say, got the grade and went on to university and graduated all within, I finished school in 4 years just like everybody else. And I had no assistance from any private institutions. I got there on my own. And in Canada, we have that system where you can go to public school for your entire life and you can make it and you can exceed in school. And it's not... There's no barrier based on the fact that, you're not going to not be accepted to a public school because you're Black or because there's some kind of discrimination. I growing up in Toronto, and specifically Don Mills, white people were the minority. There were, it was mostly Black, Indian, Asian people that I went to school with. And my graduating class was 98% went on to college and university. So that means the majority of my graduating class, which was dominated by minorities, all went on to college or university except for 2% of them.
Right, but there's actually, if I may, there's a CTV article specifically about what systemic racism looks like in Canada. And of course, bringing up examples from our own life, that's not necessarily representative. For example, they have a graph that shows that Black Canadians are far more likely than non-racialized Canadians and other visible minorities to be unemployed, to be paid less for the same position, they even have a graph that shows Black people who say that they don't think they'll get to university, but they actually do end up going to the university. So it's not as clear cut as just not being accepted or being hired. It's the fact that from very early on, from being treated differently in school by their teachers, that this belief isn't great, that they think that they can do less.
Here's the question, though. Is it everyone that is a minority experiences racism, or is it that racism might happen to people? They might experience it, but is that the only roadblock for everyone?
No, so I don't think so, but also I'm white passing. So I don't have the lived experience of being targeted for my race and being perhaps treated. It's actually, I grew up in Israel, so I could say that in elementary school, I did feel like the teachers were treating me differently because I had a thick Russian accent. But it has nothing to do with North America, really. But I can't pretend to know whether race is the only block that stands in people of color's path to success.
Well, I don't. The thing is that he uses, for example, you said that, LatinX should be a word on even if a minority percentage of the Latino, feels identified with it. The thing is that the fact that Black male can be wealthy and you think they are a minority of that percentage, then they shouldn't be represented.
What do you mean shouldn't be represented?
Because you said basically, when I used the example that Black people can have a lot of money, you say that, that shouldn't represent the statistics. Like, they are part of that community.
Most of the Black community is not rich.
But what I'm trying to be is that they can be.
They can, but Jews in Germany were rich too, but that does not make them, in the 30s.
I think this is the question. Is it that they're not rich only because of racism?
Is it that they're not rich only because of racism? I don't know. I don't know if that's only because of racism. I think there's a lot of factors in play, and I wish, I just can't. I can't speak on behalf of a person of color.
That's what I'm trying to say. Like, because if we say basically, we live in a racist society where no Black person can succeed. I mean, people can succeed.
It's not that no Black person that succeed. It's just an overwhelming majority is facing. Not that they can't succeed, is that they're facing all of these completely different treatments based on the color of their skin and how they're perceived.
Well, to a degree, for example, Indians and Nigerians are some of the most successful people when they come to North America. Jews as well, from Israel, Russians. So people come from different parts of the world, and why is it that Nigerians are more successful than, say, people from
even the Hispanics?
Algeria.
Well, whatever the reason is, I don't think the reason is lack of talent or lack of interest in being successful.
Do you think it's racism?
I think it is racism.
I think it's culturally speaking.
What do you mean culturally? So you think that Indian people are just predisposed at being better at things than Black people are?
Sometimes culture does impact. And I will use an example that Thomas Sowell used in one of the books. When, for example, Chinese people, and I forgot exactly the parts of China that he compared, no American could distinguish if a Chinese person came from a different region from China than the other region from China. And he realized that certain Chinese group that came from a certain region of China was more likely to develop money, to make money in the United States. Why is that? He realized that there were indeed cultural differences between these two groups, even though both of them were from China. So culture does impact. That doesn't mean that you're going to be poor only because you belong to the culture. Like, it doesn't make sense. And both Chinese persons experienced racism back then, because and let's be honest, an American can barely distinguish a Chinese person from a Filipino, so let alone distinguish people from different regions of China.
I agree with you on that, but Oh my God, did I just forget what I was going to say?
Clear your head.
Hold on. I had such a good point. Okay, can you just repeat the last thing that you said?
About the different regions of China, or
About culture.
Oh, yeah, okay. Success looks differently. So, you said there's a lot of people from India who are successful in these industries.
so especially IT.
Right, that they're successful in these industries, but that does not mean that they don't face racism in the workplace or wherever else. Again, I don't know exactly what they face, but that
does
doesn't mean they don't
everyone face it? That's the question.
Everyone who?
Well, because you say that it's not just culture, but does everybody who doesn't succeed face racism?
No.
If they're a minority?
I think racism plays a part almost indefinitely. Almost definitely.
For everyone?
For every racially, visibly...
But do you think that every black person, every Latino person, do you think that they are unsuccessful only because of race in their life?
No, because... No, that's not at all what I think. But I do think that we can't ignore the fact that as a community, the
that
black
racism
people...
can be a barrier.
Absolutely can and is. Not to every single person, because there are rich black people. There were rich Jews in the 30s in Germany. Again, success looks differently. Just because somebody is not rich doesn't mean they're successful. Doesn't mean they're not successful, and vice versa.
Oh yeah, some people don't want to be rich. Like some
Yeah.
people are happy being middle class.
I couldn't be rich. I would spend all my money way too quick. I'll stay poor.
You need a money manager.
I do.
I'll manage it for you.
Nope.
Okay. Guess not. Well, okay. I think that's we've had a big discussion here, but I mean, I guess, what's the future of inclusivity? Lastly, what do you think, Yan? Very quickly.
Let's try to do more. As long as it doesn't harm anybody, let's try to do more.
Okay, Anna.
Let people live their life the way they want to live, and being inclusive is looking people through their skills, through their values, through what they bring to you, and not through color.
And Christina.
Very
quickly.
I mean, I agree with both sides. I'm gonna just combine the two and say, yeah, that's what I think. What they both said.
Okay.
What they both said.
Okay, I think that's very fair. So, that was our show for this week. Thank you to everyone that tuned in and messaged us live. Yan, thank you so much for joining the panel today.
I had a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
Thank you
Absolutely.
for coming. Yeah.
And Christina
thank you
and
for
Anna,
coming.
it's been a pleasure as always.
You too, Elliot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elliot.
Glad to have Anna back after her trip.
I survived.
You survived.
Missed her.
And that was our third last episode. Once again, that was our show for tonight. A brand new episode of the Raben Report will be coming to you next week. Our second last show, in fact. It's true. And so you do not want to miss it. Same day, same time, same people. I'm Elliot Raben. Have a good night, everyone.